Space. I reckon that's a lonely place to call home for two travel-weary bluegrassernauts. But between the long shifts of fishing for hydrocarbon in the lakes of Saturn's moon Titan, there's just enough time to get some picking in. So hush up your mug and fetch a jug of Lunarshine while you can join us in the loneliest honky-tonk this side of the Appalachian supercluster. By God, here she is a-coming. A new transmission of Podcast with Marcel, featuring Hayes Griffin.
So I guess Jack isn't chasing us anymore?
Nah, I haven't seen heads or tails of him in about 10 hours. Something seems up, though.
Antique must have lost him with her fancy flying. That means we'll make it to Texarkana with time to spare. I'm sure you'll feel better when the mysterious bluegrass artifact has been delivered and the people of Mulinos are safe.
Yeah, you're right. Let's go get some beers.
Okay. This has never happened before.
Wait, where the hell is JD?
I can't get a lick of work done with all this endless bass fiddle racket. JD, so you want to be a great bluegrass bassist, huh?
Yep.
You know how Marcel and Hayes got so good at music?
I'm not sure.
They would practice right inside that door. Then they wouldn't be bothered by all the noise in here. Do you want to practice like them?
Of course.
Let me get the door for you then. Finally, some peace and quiet.
You know, we used to get our own beers before JD was our bartender bot.
Yeah, I'm sure we can figure this out.
Let's check down here. I feel like he normally reaches back here for the beers.
No, he normally looks over this way. Hey, there's something written on this.
Oh yeah, it looks like JD probably labeled the beer back when we had the paint out. God, his spelling is just terrible.
Wait a second, this looks the same as the Mulino shipment.
Yeah, it kind of does.
But we stole our ship from the Monroe Corporation. Why would the Mulinonians have given us their cargo in a Monroe Corporation shipping container?
Maybe the Mulinos cargo is full of beer?
Y'all wouldn't even believe what I'm working on. No more being stuck on this ship or in some lousy duocoder all the time.
Okay, we're not gonna get this thing open. We better just find JD.
I'm on it. Marcel? I think I found him.
Ugh. Antique, did you get JD to walk out the airlock again?
He said he wanted to practice bass out there.
Time to suit up.
Oh, I'll turn on the AI-generated bluegrass. Opening the bay doors.
Fishing pole ready.
JD, can we get some beers?
Coming right up.
JD, why does the beer cooler look the same as the Mulino shipment?
Yeah, and can you open those Monroe Corporation locks to get us beers?
I'm not sure.
I'm satisfied with that answer.
Speaking of beer, have I ever told you about the time Jimmy Martin almost started a fist fight at the Grand Ole Opry?
Sounds like the boys might be talking about some bluegrass history.
So there's this book by this guy named Tom Piazza. It's called True Adventures with the King of Bluegrass, Jimmy Martin. Have you ever read this book, Hayes?
Honestly, I'm a little ashamed to admit that no, I have not, and I considered myself a bluegrass nerd before this, so yeah.
You know, it's kind of weird to call this one a book because it's really just like one article that was kind of, popular at the time that got turned into this book. So there's a foreword by Marty Stewart, and there's some other articles that Tom wrote afterwards about Jimmy's discography and stuff. But really just this one chapter is what we're going to talk about today, and it's an insane story. Before I tell that story, I do want to say that I had to pay $60 to have this book delivered to the spaceship. I thought I had my own copy, but I guess I borrowed it from a friend or something. But it's rare enough that that's what it costs to get it
What?
to get it express shipped to you.
Wait, are you telling me that it was just $60 for the shipping alone, or was it $60 total?
No, $60 total.
Okay. That's, I mean, we'll do anything for the sake of bluegrass history.
So Tom Piazza is kind of famous for writing articles and books about jazz music, but he kind of got obsessed with bluegrass and with Jimmy Martin, and that's what led him here. So first, I want to do some history on Jimmy Martin. Jimmy Martin is the big vocalist after Flatt and Scruggs leave Bill Monroe in 1948.
Yes.
So I believe Bill Monroe starts as Bluegrass Boys in 1940. Flatt and Scruggs join in 1945. Flatt and Scruggs leave in 1948. 1949, Jimmy Martin joins, I believe. He spends 5 years with Bill Monroe. Then he plays with the Osborne Brothers, and then he starts his own group. And there's kind of that funny story about how the band name gets moved around until it settles with Jimmy. We talked about that a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing. Despite playing in several like super legendary lineups, Jimmy Martin is still kind of on the outs, like he's not super recognized by the public, the country music scene at large. And that's a shame. He's had some really great peaks in his career. I don't want to undervalue what he's done, but he never got the recognition that he deserved. And that's what's important. And part of that is he's a big drinker. He's kind of raw. And basically, all the things we love about him, that make him him and make his music so good, are also the things that made him difficult to work with and kind of kept him out of the scene in a way.
Yes.
So along comes Tom Piazza, and he wants to write this article on Jimmy Martin. Jimmy Martin's kind of in his later years, his career's kind of winding down, and Tom is a big fan at this point. He doesn't really know what to expect. He's not really baked into the bluegrass scene yet, but he's trying his hardest. And he calls Jimmy over and over again, and it's like he's talking to two different people. Sometimes Jimmy's sober and he's kind of agreeable. Sometimes Jimmy is drunk and hard to talk to, and he starts screaming or shouting, starts creating fights. But no matter what, basically every time Tom calls, he has to re-explain who he is. He has to explain, I want to write an article about you. This is what this is. And Jimmy just does not remember, really, up until the point that it's like a day before Tom's supposed to show up, and Jimmy's like, oh, well, I was going to go rabbit hunting, but I guess I can babysit you. Jimmy just basically never remembers the arrangement, and Tom just shows up eventually.
Wow. I mean, so I've seen the Jimmy Martin, documentary, and that kind of tracks, I guess, with some of the like wily nature that's presented there. Man, that had to have been frustrating.
So Tom eventually shows up at Jimmy's place. Jimmy's place isn't that far from his hotel. And Jimmy is in the driveway, and he's getting into his midnight blue 1985 Lincoln Stretch limousine in the driveway. Do you know this limo?
Yes, sorry.
This limo says like sunny side of the mountain on the back. And the license plate says King JM because Jimmy's known as the king of bluegrass. So anyway, he gets in gets in the limo, and he's just ignoring Tom. Tom sees like the backup lights coming on, like he's gonna get run over. He goes over to the driver's side. He knocks on it. Jimmy rolls down the window, and Jimmy's like, "Leave your stuff here. Get in." And so Tom gets in the passenger side of the limo and doesn't know where they're going. And Jimmy starts trying to like pull out. He's doing like a 5-point turn to turn around and get down the driveway in this giant limousine.
Absolutely.
Jimmy stalls the car 3 times while trying to back out of the driveway.
Oh, man.
They finally get out. They go down the road. They only go like 10 minutes down the road. And Jimmy stops in front of an incinerator. And so Jimmy gets out of the car. He goes to the back seat, And he opens up the back seat and he's got a bunch of garbage bags in there. He grabs the garbage bags, he walks out, and he's talking to the guy at the incinerator for like 15 minutes. Jimmy's just burning his garbage. And Tom's sitting in the passenger seat like, what have I gotten into? What is this? And Jimmy eventually gets back in the car. They go back to Jimmy's house. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's just insane. It's ridiculous opening to this thing.
And I'm thinking, like, you're driving a limo with a stick shift too. Like, if there's any possibility of stalling a vehicle that I'm going to be taking out of my driveway, like that's the last one. Anyway,
so they get back to Jimmy's house, and Jimmy invites Tom in. And Jimmy's house is like a real bachelor pad. It's full of like tapes and sound equipment and like, CDs he's trying to sell, hats he's trying to sell. And Tom is going to give Jimmy this bottle of whiskey that he's promised him. And, he goes through this whole explanation of like, I wanted to get you a bottle from Tennessee because you're from Sneedsville, Tennessee, and I didn't get it from Kentucky because that's not where you're from, and all of that. And Jimmy just says, that's not my drink. Like Jimmy drinks a different bottle, and but he takes it anyway. He takes the bottles, he puts them in his cabinet, and they will come back. They're integral to this story. So they talk, and they're getting along. Jimmy's sharing all of his like quirks and funny stuff. Jimmy definitely rants about the Grand Ole Opry and how he's never been accepted into the Grand Ole Opry, which is kind of a big thing in Jimmy's life that he never made it in there. It's very frustrating. But he's also talking about like his dogs. Jimmy names all of his dogs after famous musicians. And the animals he likes are named after musicians he does like. The animals he doesn't like are named after musicians he doesn't like. And I think he had a dog named Rhonda Vincent that he didn't like.
Shots fired.
And I think he had a goat that he didn't care for that was named Vernon. I think Vernon might have been one of his old fiddle players. I don't remember. So eventually, Jimmy and Tom make plans to go to the Grand Ole Opry in a couple days or something. And Tom spends the next day, going into downtown and seeing some friends and going to the gift shops, doing the whole thing. And, a stark contrast to like how Jimmy lives in sort of real countryism. And the next day, Tom decides that, he's going to go back. He's going to pick up Jimmy. They're going to go to the Grand Ole Opry. Jimmy had told him to get dressed up and stuff. So Tom tries to pick up Jimmy at Jimmy's place. He's outside Nashville next to his hotel, at Jimmy's place in the driveway. And the Grand Ole Opry's in an hour, and he's supposed to go with Jimmy. But he's out there honking his horn, and Jimmy's not answering to the horn honks. And now all the dogs are barking, and Tom can't get out of his car because of the dogs. So, like, when he opens the door, the dogs are, like, barking and lunging at him.
Man.
So he's, like, stuck in the car, and he decides that he's going to drive away. He's going to go to the gas station next door, and he's going to, like, call Jimmy on the payphone and try to get Jimmy to, like, come call the dogs off so he can pick them up. When he calls Jimmy, it's obvious that Jimmy is like super drunk. Jimmy Martin is toasted already.
Oh.
And so when Tom drives back to Jimmy's place, Jimmy Martin is out there struggling with the screen door and like shouting at the dogs. And Jimmy Martin immediately goes back inside. So Tom is out in the driveway in the dark. None of the lights are on. And he's like fumbling, trying to like get out and not bother any dogs, like try to stumble through the carport and then find the door into the house in the pitch black. And when he gets in the house, it's all dark. None of the lights are on. And there's only one light on. And it's the overhead light in the kitchen. And Jimmy's there. And Jimmy's eyes are just drunk. Jimmy's in a blue tracksuit. And he's just not there. He's not entirely there. And here's a little passage from the book when that's going on. I'm higher than a Georgia kite, he says. I know what they'll say. Jimmy Martin's been drinking again, but I don't owe them anything. He looks up at me. Do I? I can see his eyes pull into focus. Where's your Jimmy Martin cap? He says, squinting at me. I left it back at the hotel, I say. His eyes narrow into slits. I can borrow one of yours, I offer, if you want me to wear one. You got one of your own, don't you? You said on the phone you wanted me to get a little dressed up, so... Oh, So it's F Jimmy Martin. Yeah, Jimmy didn't say F. Silence. Listen, he says, steadying himself with his forearm on the table. If I give the keys to the limo, will you drive? Can you drive the limo? The limo? Jimmy, I say, why don't we just take my car? No, he says, his voice rising. We're taking the limo with sunny side of the mountain along the back and everything. They'll recognize it. They know me. Can you drive it? Why don't we? We're taking the limo, he says. We can drive right inside. Whoever says hello, says hello. He stands up unsteadily. Me and you are going to the Opry, he says. Did you get you a drink, he says? Oh, man. So Tom ends up checking, Jimmy's cabinet, and he finds the bottle that he gave Jimmy, and there's only like 1.5 inches left in it.
Oh.
Jimmy's crushed the whole thing.
Oh.
So that's why Jimmy's toasted. They do take the bottle with them. They toss that in the limo. But Tom hears Jimmy grunting from the other room. He's like, what's going on? And Jimmy says, come on in, And Tom's trying to see if Jimmy's okay. And Jimmy's completely transformed. His hair is done. He's in a red embroidered shirt. He's got black slacks, white cowboy boots with embroidery and rhinestones. And Jimmy grabs this black Western jacket, white Western tie, straw cowboy hat with all the feathers and the hat band. And he's like, how do I look? He can just he can just switch like that. He looks sober.
I mean, I guess that's years of practice, right? He's a high functioning drunk from having to play all those shows high as a Georgia kite.
Definitely. So they end up getting in the limo, and they go outside, and Tom gets in the driver's side, and Jimmy gets in the passenger side. So what's the point of the limo? Who sits up front in a limo?
That's so ridiculous.
So when Tom's in there, he's realizing that he's got to do the 5-point turn to turn around. And so he tries to look out the back window, and it's so far back there. And it's incredibly small. It's like the size of an envelope. And so he rolls down the window. He puts his head out the window. And as he's backing up, Jimmy's yelling at him. And Jimmy's like, cut it, back to the right, as hard as you can. Cut it, cut it, cut it. And Tom backs up. He avoids hitting a tree and stuff. He shifts it back into drive, and he immediately stalls it. So he has to start the engine again. And he pulls as far forward as he can, and he immediately stalls again. So at this point, he's boxed in all of the other cars in the driveway. Jimmy's also got a van and a truck. Tom's car, I think, is in the carport, and he's basically blocked all of that off. So if they can't figure this out, all of the cars are stuck now because the limo's in the way. And Jimmy starts yelling at him, and Jimmy's like, cut the lights, start it again. Jimmy's got all of these tricks.
It's the limo or nothing.
Exactly. Jimmy's got all these tricks to try to get the limo to start. And it won't go. So Jimmy's like, pop the hood. Tom has to pop the hood for Jimmy. And Jimmy walks out of the carport holding this black box and this extension cord. And Tom can feel that the extension cord is melted. This isn't a safe extension cord to use. But he's still trying to plug this black box in. He's not entirely sure what's going on, but he's trying to help. And as he plugs it in, there's a shower of sparks. And Tom is just blinded for a second. Tom almost dies trying to jumpstart this stupid limo. Yeah. So eventually, Tom gets the thing plugged in. They manage to, charge the battery for a second or whatever. And they get the limo started, and Jimmy grabs some jumper cables. He tosses them in the back of the limo just in case. And they finish the turn, and they get on the road. So it ends up working out. Yeah. And Jimmy starts turning back to Tom and asking him, hey, who are you? Who's driving?
Oh.
Are you the author? Are you writing an article about me? Jimmy doesn't know who he's with or where he's going even. Jimmy's slipping in and out of understanding what's going on, and Tom is just sweating, right? And he gets to the last direction. He takes the exit for Opryland, and he knows nothing else. Meanwhile, he's telling Jimmy Martin, yes, my name is Tom. So they make some wrong turns. Jimmy's trying to give directions. And eventually they find the back entrance, and there's a guard, and Tom is sweating. Like,
Yeah.
oh no, like we have to talk to someone. Jimmy's not performing. Like, why would they let us in? And everyone knows Jimmy, and Jimmy just like snaps to lucidity, right? Jimmy's just like, oh, hey, how you doing? He knows everyone's name. He's, flirting with the lady security guards. He's talking to all the guys. And they're like, oh, yeah, Jimmy, it's so good to see you. Just go park back there.
Pays to be the king, I guess.
It pays to be the king, baby. So when they finally get parked, Jimmy has been searching for the bottle of whiskey the whole time. And he finally finds it. And they both take swigs. And they get out. And they're going to walk into the Grand Ole Opry. So as they're walking in, Tom makes a really funny observation, and it's that backstage at the Grand Ole Opry looks like a high school play. Like everyone's in costume and running around and like, going to put on a little show for their parents.
It's a country music play.
But I feel like that's also like kind of right on the money. Like that is what that feels like. So anyway, they get to the green room. Jimmy's slipping in and out of consciousness, but everyone knows him. He knows everybody. Jimmy Martin is telling jokes. Everything's going well. I won't repeat any of the jokes that Jimmy said. They're a little rough, but they run into a bluegrass band that's practicing, and Jimmy sees this band, and he goes up to the guitarist, and the guitarist is super happy to meet him. Tom describes the guitarist as a young guy, by the way. And the guitarist says he's going to be playing a little bluegrass with Ricky Skaggs tonight. And I don't think it's in the book, but I'm thinking like, man, could that be Brian Sutton? Could that be Cody Kilby? It's definitely too long ago to be Jake Workman. This feels, it's not Workman.
What year would this have been, maybe?
I don't know. I feel like, I want to say this is like a 90s story, but
Yeah.
my copy of the book is from 99.
Clay Hess was an early guitar player with Kentucky Thunder.
It could be, yeah. Anyway, Jimmy Martin, upon hearing Ricky Skaggs' name, says, a little bluegrass? Well, he's about the sorriest effing bluegrass you could ever hope to be on with, I tell you. Yeah. So then Jimmy is insisting that he wants to say that to Ricky's face. And the guitar player thinks this is kind of funny. And he's like, oh, Ricky's over there.
Oh, for sure.
And so to clue you in on why Jimmy Martin might be so mad about Ricky Skaggs, there's some drama that happened. Basically, Ricky Skaggs was on a recording session with Jimmy Martin. Jimmy Martin wanted Ricky to sing the tenor part this specific way, but it was too high for Ricky Skaggs. And so Jimmy Martin now hates Ricky Skaggs. I don't know.
Because he didn't sing that tenor.
Because he didn't sing that tenor. Yeah, it's dumb. So now Tom is following Jimmy like deeper and deeper into the bowels of the Grand Ole Opry. And they're going through all these different rooms and these little spaces. And eventually they find a bunch of really talented bluegrass musicians. And Jimmy gets distracted by these guys. And he's like, hey, let's all get together and like sing a tune. And so they kick off this tune, and Tom does a beautiful explanation of what the music is like and everything. But, the important thing is that Ricky Skaggs happens to walk by right as they're getting into this tune, and Jimmy shouts, is that the biggest asshole in Nashville? And then Jimmy Martin absolutely crushes the chorus to Will You Be Loving Another Man?
If that ain't bluegrass, I don't know what is, boy.
So as the jamming winds down, Ricky Skaggs actually walks up to say hi to Jimmy. And here's a little passage from the book when that happens. Hey, Jimmy, he says pleasantly, walking over to our little group, strumming his mandolin, perhaps a little bit nervously. How you doing? Okay, Martin says, making it sound somehow like a challenge. How you doing? Okay. Strum. Think you can still sing tenor to me? Oh no, I think. Skaggs laughs, strums a little more. I don't know if you don't get it too high for me. Ricky, it's left up to you, Martin says. It's not left up to me. If you want to make an ass out of yourself and don't want to sing tenor with me, don't do it. He can sing tenor with me. And he points over to Paul Brewster, who they had just been jamming together. He sure can, Skaggs says, strumming, already regretting that he has come over. He sings a good tenor to me. But you can't sing tenor to me, Martin persists. You did with Ralph Stanley, didn't you? I was 16 then, Skaggs answers. He lost his balls, huh? Martin says to the few of us gathered around. He lost his balls. He can't sing tenor with Jimmy no more. Strum, strum.
Wow.
I can sing lead with any sumbitch who's ever sung, Jimmy Martin says. You sure can, Skaggs says. Yeah. Whoa.
Wow.
So eventually Ricky walks away and, they kind of separate, but it is a tense, weird moment. And Jimmy says some wild stuff. So after they separate, Jimmy ends up hanging out with little Jimmy Dickens, which actually kind of dates this story because little Jimmy Dickens would have been quite old when this happened.
That's true.
They share war stories and stuff. And then the show starts and they're watching from the wings. And basically in the wings at the Grand Ole Opry, there's a little staging area where the next act that is going to go up, waits. And they're just hanging out there, just sitting there the entire time. And Jimmy starts looking angrier and angrier. And Tom eventually is like, hey, man, what's going on? Like, how you feeling? And Jimmy just starts going off about Bill Anderson. Do you even know who Bill Anderson is?
Bill Anderson, a country singer. Yeah, famous country singer.
Yeah, but do you know anything else about Bill? I have no opinions about Bill Anderson, right? I couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, we probably know some of his songs. Yeah, I just know the name.
Why would he be the one to get Jimmy so mad? So now Jimmy is saying that he's going to go, punch Bill Anderson in the mouth. He's going to throw down with Bill. And Tom has to hold him back. And it's kind of performative, Tom isn't really holding Jimmy Martin back. Jimmy Martin's just kind of putting on a show as if oh yeah, I would have really hurt him if someone hadn't held me back. And sure enough, Bill Anderson actually walks by. And Jimmy kind of lunges at him, and, Tom holds him back. And they have this whole dramatic moment in front of all of the Grand Ole Opry staff, Grand Ole Opry members, famous musicians. Just everyone is there, and they watch Jimmy Martin pull this whole act.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad. I know we've had some funny moments here, but that's kind of a sad moment because this is Jimmy Martin. We're watching him ruin his dream. You know what I mean?
And I mean, we know that just anecdotally that playing the game is what it's all about for the Grand Ole Opry thing, right? That's the,
Yeah.
You kind of have to be able to put on that smile and play nice and shake and howdy and do all that stuff.
And what is Jimmy doing?
I.e. not lunge at Bill Anderson as he's coming off stage at the Grand Ole Opry. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also kind of like I said at the beginning, those are kind of the reasons that we love Jimmy. He never played the act. He never pretended to be Nashville. He was always himself.
Yeah.
He was authentic, country. And ultimately, that's also the thing that kept him from his big goal. He wanted to be a Grand Ole Opry star, but he never played that game,
Definitely. And, they cover the sadness part. If there was one bullet point that I came away from that King of Bluegrass documentary with, it was the fact that Jimmy Martin thought he should have been a member of the Grand Ole Opry and was immensely devastated at the fact that he was not. But this kind of casts a different light on that
100%.
story. They show him to be a little bit of a hellion or whatever there, but this is, like you said, it's extremely indicative of why he maybe didn't secure that membership.
Yeah, and maybe a succinct way to say that is because Jimmy Martin never gave in to Nashville, never gave in to their way of life, and because of that, he was never really accepted by them. And I think there's something to kind of respect in there. Weirdly, I kind of respect the way that he kind of stayed a mess. He wasn't going to pretend for anyone. He knew who Jimmy Martin was, and he was going to keep being that. He wanted to drink and he wanted to hunt, and not that those are, not that drinking is necessarily a great personality trait, but, the fact that he was authentically himself is pretty cool and pretty amazing. Jimmy Martin never lied to you about who he was. And, because of that, he didn't get to do the thing that he loved the most. He didn't get to, be a Grand Ole Opry member. And, it's kind of like he made a sacrifice to be authentic. It's weird.
It's almost too to piggyback on that, it's admirable, right? And most of us, if we were to look at ourselves, our best qualities are often our worst qualities too. Like our strengths, whenever we do something terrible or something goes wrong in our lives, oftentimes it can be that same mechanism that was the source of such like goodness, So
This is like when you're doing the job interview and you're like, my greatest weakness is also my greatest strength. And it's that I'm too detail oriented.
Yeah.
I care too much.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. What do you think is up with JD in that beer cooler?
I have absolutely no idea. Let's go to the bridge and just ask Antique.
Oh, hey JD, what are you pointing at?
Is it a constellation?
No.
Gosh, this would be easier if JD said more than 20 pre-programmed phrases.
I'll save you all the trouble of 20 questions. We're surrounded by Monroe Corporation fighters.
What? Antique, what do we do?
Weapons system online.
Do we even have weapon systems?
Ooh, me first. Hup.
You'll have to hit a 2-meter moving target.
That's nothing. I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home.
Those aren't real things. Luke Skywalker says that in Star Wars.
Direct hit.
Don't get cocky, kid.
I get it. That's from Star Wars as well. We can stop.
He can't save us with just that turret, can he?
Not at all.
Help us, Antique. You're our only hope.
Analyzing all possible outcomes for successful destruction of enemy fleet. Positive outcomes secured. Self-destruct sequence initiated.
Antique, what are you talking about? What's going on up there?
Marcel, get out of there. JD and I will get the Mule Nose shipment and we'll meet you at Escape Pod 3. The shipment is too big. It won't fit through the Escape Pod portal.
JD, can you open these locks or not? Bill Monroe's Mandolin?
But wait, JD, you're a traitor? You work for the Monroe Corporation?
I'm not sure.
We're alive.
But I've got bad news. Bill Monroe's Mandolin. It's destroyed.
That's not even the first time it's been destroyed.
Set up straight and get ready for a bluegrass history lesson.
Shut up, traitor.
He did open the case for you. At the very worst, he's a double agent.
Antique, you have a body.
Yeah, I've been working on this when JD isn't practicing bass.
Well, I'm glad you have a new body, Antique, because you just destroyed everything we know and love. I knew I should have listened to what Brian Sutton was saying on the Initiation VHS.
Speaking of things being destroyed, do you know about the first time that Bill Monroe's Mandolin got busted up?
I feel like you're going to tell me about it, even if I do know about the first time it got busted up.
This is kind of an interesting, eerie story because we still don't know who done it. But if we go all the way back to 1985, imagine with me, Marcel, we're in the midst of the Cold War. Ronald Reagan is president. The Nintendo was just released in Japan. It's an amazing time for history.
Doc Brown has just finished turning a DeLorean into a time machine.
That is true. Yes. So many things happening in 1985. But yeah, 1985 was actually kind of an interesting year or era for Bill Monroe at this point in time because Bill obviously was on the back end of his career at this point. Bill's in his 70s, you know.
Yeah.
There were things happening in his career at this point like the retrospective era. You know, we're starting to have like 50-year anniversaries of, you know, his original recordings with Flatt and Scruggs and all these kind of things. Actually, it would have been 30-year. Regardless, so many of these kind of looking backward things were happening in Bill's life. He was starting to kind of establish, you know, his own museum in Nashville with his son James and do all of these kind of things. And the reason that I'm mentioning this retrospective thing and also this kind of museum thing. Bill is not doing so well mentally and from a health perspective at this point in time. The people around him are able to notice that the kind of towering giant of bluegrass that once was is starting to kind of sink into old age a little bit. You know what I mean? He's becoming more vulnerable from a physical standpoint and kind of a mental standpoint at this point. I'm not saying that Bill, was going into dementia or anything like that, but it's just like the years had gotten to him. He started to become a little softer and a little less tenacious than he was back in the day. There are things that started to happen around this era. Like, for years he had insisted that his band be paid in cash only, which if you think about it from a 1940s or 50s perspective, that's a great thing, right? Because if you're not leaving that gig with cash, you have no, what, they couldn't Venmo you the money later back in the day. You know what I mean? You probably weren't going to get paid, right? So these kind of old fixtures of Bill's business model started to show their kind of irrelevance at this point in time. People started to take advantage of Bill. There were these numbers and figures reported in the book, Can't You Hear Me Calling, about Bill's kind of net worth around this point in time. And it was around $1 million, $1.2 million, most of it in real estate holdings. And when they broke it down, the dude only had $11,000 in cash at this point in time, which even in 1980s dollars for the father of bluegrass music, a member of the Grand Ole Opry, someone who had been charting on the country charts with his compilation guest star, bluegrass album.
Should have been way more.
The numbers should have been way bigger. So what people are kind of surmising is that he wasn't getting the royalty payouts that he should have been getting because he didn't really have the kind of know-how to secure that money. He wasn't getting all of the money from his gigs because it was being stored in cash on the bus. So people were probably going on the bus and taking a handful of bills here and there. This is a really sad period for Bill Monroe, in my opinion, like in reading the book. And we obviously have all these stories, kind of akin to the Jimmy Martin thing, all of the fiery, tenacious Bill Monroe stories, right? And we start to see a little bit more of the kind of mind games with Bill Monroe, a la Jimmy Martin at this point in time. There was an interesting story about John Duffy. Bill, they kind of had this like frenemy relationship at this point in time. Duffy would, anytime there was a group of people around, he would proclaim loudly, that Bill was losing it and couldn't cut the mustard anymore and all this kind of stuff because he was getting old. and they would just prank each other backstage and stuff like that, But you start to see these things where like Bill, he would pretend to just like not know Duffy or not know someone that he had known for years. It reminded me of that Jimmy Martin story, like not knowing the guy that he had met 10 minutes ago. I think it was a bit of a different thing because Jimmy was drunk and Bill was a teetotaler.
It's different to like Bill Monroe's like gaslighting everyone. Jimmy's a drunk.
Yes, exactly. But you start to see Monroe, instead of wielding his like physical power, instead of holding the Bluegrass Boys on his shoulders, at a baseball diamond, he at this point is starting to kind of play mind games with people in order to keep them in check because that's all he had left. But one thing that sucked is he didn't have the kind of sharp wit for his business at this point in time. He had a couple key figures that he relied upon. Tony Conway being one of those figures. So Tony Conway is one of these figures in Bill Monroe's life at this point in time. It's Bill's manager, and he's the guy that actually started to modify Bill's business model so that he would be safer from some of these kind of scammers or schemers who were kind of peeling money off the top. They started to give him a security detail going back and forth from gigs, to make sure that people wouldn't steal money off the bus. And something kind of interesting happens. We'll say 1985 is the starting point here. On April 1st of that year, Bill Monroe announces that he's getting married again to...
it can't be Carolyn. It's certainly not Bessie.
Delia Streeter. Yeah, so Delia is kind of the late in life, partner of Bill Monroe. She was an executive secretary. She was 30 years younger than him. All of the kind of stuff that we hear about Bill Monroe's love life and affliction for younger women. She kind of embodies that, right?
We've been there. We've talked about
Interesting.
it.
We've talked about this before, too. You've talked about this before. So everybody knows, right? Like there's this whole relationship. Bill isn't exactly great at maintaining a monogamous relationship, right?
Oof.
So we'll just kind of toss that out there. But in 1985, on April Fool's Day, he announces to all of his friends and his farmhands that he's getting married, and they don't believe him, but soon they do because he brings Delia along and they actually get married. The entrance of Delia into Bill's life also marks the beginning of this really weird period of almost like mental and physical vandalism for Bill Monroe.
Mental vandalism.
It's really interesting. Like you start to hear stories about things like at his little museum, the cashier getting held up at gunpoint, thousands of dollars being stolen off of the bus, a physical, like a murder threat being phoned into the Grand Ole Opry. And this is when the security detail actually shows up because the Opry is so concerned for Bill's safety at this point that they call the sheriff's department and have them transport him to the county line where the next sheriff's department takes over and takes Bill back to his house. Like it's someone really has it out for Bill Monroe at this point in time. Nobody knows who it is. Nobody even knows if these events are connected because once again, we're at the back half of Bill Monroe's career. We know that he was kind of a womanizer, not really into monogamy. He's peeved a lot of people off from an emotional relationship standpoint and a business standpoint at this point in his career. So it's like, are these things connected? Is this a new kind of feud that he's started with someone? Nobody knows, but it's a year's worth.
Wait, hold up.
Yeah.
So we don't, who broke the mandolin? We don't know.
No one has solved it yet.
Wild.
Exactly. I think this is our task. That's really what I'm implying here.
But like we know who it is, right? Because it's obviously like an angry ex-lover or something, right? It's Delia Streeter turned around and robbed the museum and then stole from the bus. And like that's what happened.
Freaking traitor. But maybe a conspiracy to be had here. Regardless.
Do you think that this is just like indicative of the time period? Like, was there more crime in Nashville in the 80s and that's why this is happening? Or is this really just Bill losing control of his business? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, I'm almost wondering, I'm kind of in line with a little bit of what you're saying here. If you think about mid-80s Nashville, we are like kind of at the pinnacle of like the glitz and glamour of Nashville, meaning that there's a lot of money and a lot of people looking to take advantage of that to some degree, kind of, on the outskirts of that phenomenon. So because Nashville is so popular, there's so many stars around. And Bill Monroe is a bigger star, but maybe an older guy who could be taken advantage of. It totally makes sense to me that this would just maybe be some sort of incidental phenomenon.
This is like a string bean situation.
Yeah, in September of 1985, so Bill was married in April, September of 1985, coming out of a gig, Glenn Duncan, Bill Monroe's fiddle player at the time, sees that Bill's Cadillac had been vandalized with all sorts of spray-painted threats and everything like that. There was that death threat at the Grand Ole Opry, and people even start to talk about how the stress was starting to affect Bill. I don't know if you remember this story, but in 1953, he was in a huge car wreck that, like broke
we talked about
most of his bones and all that stuff, and he refused painkillers and was just like a manly man about the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
People are saying that this period of Bill's life, they started to see him crack a little bit. Like the pressure was getting to him and the terror was actually starting to set in. They would say he would go out on the road for 3 days at a time. And by the second day, he would be such a ball of nerves that the third gig that they would play on that tour would usually be terrible. He couldn't even keep his mandolin or his singing parts together on some of it.
Wow. That's crazy.
Which is insane to think, right? Because Monroe, I always had the impression, especially from people that I've talked to that were close to Monroe, that the musical performance aspect of his life was always dialed in. You know what I mean? He was such a showman that he could always kind of pull through and keep that together. But this period, we start to see that crack a little bit, you know?
Do you think that like Bill was such a like imposing physical figure? You know, they tell all these stories about, you've heard this, about him like playing at the schoolhouse and there would be a fight outside and he'd go break it up. He'd go beat him up.
No.
Yeah. And that's like Monroe Brothers stuff. But do you think that because he used to be able to do that, like throw his weight around in that way, now he's getting a little older, maybe he can't do that as much. Maybe his like natural reaction, his way to try to like fix that or something is by playing these mind games.
Yeah.
He's losing control a little bit, and so he's gonna do this instead of the like brute force tactic.
Yeah, they say that like the only physical prank he would pull on people at this point in time, because he used to do pranks, you know, like physical,
Oh yeah.
like we said, feats of strength and stuff, was to when someone would reach out to shake his hand, he would pull them a half step closer just to get them a little off kilter. But that was like all he would do, you know, which is hilarious. Wouldn't that be great to be, you know,
That's
like
so dumb.
knocked off balance by Bill Monroe?
I love it.
So I think that's actually a really great kind of way to set the scene here, because in October of 1985, the Bluegrass Hall of Fame, or the museum that Bill is running, is kind of in financial decline. October 85 is when that holdup happened. So the cashier was like struck with a gun and then like, you know, robbed. 1 month later, this is where the plot thickens.
Oh, hold up. Before you thicken up that plot, let me just point out that October 1985 is when Back to the Future takes place. So presumably Doc Brown is finishing the time machine, and he's responsible for all of this, right?
Dude,
It all ties together.
we just figured it out. I think we just figured it out. Like the
It's so obvious once you know.
everything is coming into alignment.
Yeah, it always comes back to the Future.
I mean, seriously, dude, we gotta. I'm in. You know, this is not the end of this conversation, I don't think. But anyways,
Yeah, go ahead.
October 85, the cashier gets held up. November 85, like less than a month later, November 13th, 1985, things are kind of business as usual at Monroe's farm. He and Delia go out to lunch around 12:45 p.m. It was common practice for Bill and the farmhands and everyone to just kind of leave the property around 12:45 and go get lunch every day. That was kind of like a regular thing on their schedule. Bill and Delia took separate cars that day because Delia was going to go shopping, and she actually returns to the farm first. So Bill was still out hanging with the boys. Delia comes back, and she kind of notices something interesting when she walks in the living room, like things are like something is off. And she immediately looks toward the fireplace and sees that Bill's famous July 9, 1923 Lloyd Loar Gibson F5 plus another Lloyd Loar mandolin that Bill owned at that time were smashed to bits on the floor of the living room.
Absolutely insane.
Kind of a chaotic scene. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to call Bill because she didn't want to deal with Bill's initial reaction. So she actually calls James Monroe, Bill's son, delivers the news to James, and then James kind of passes it off to Bill. They call the police. They bring Bill back to the house. Miraculously, the interesting thing is that whoever destroyed these mandolins or whatever did it with a fire poker. This is kind of the kind of famous fact that most people know about this, that someone took a fire poker to Bill Monroe's mandolin. There were maybe like half-inch strips taken out of the top of the spruce, and they could tell that, you know, something narrow had punctured it. Splinters all over the floor. Miraculously, though, like I was about to say, they missed the tone bars on the Loar. So
That's remarkable.
that kind of implies, for those of you that don't know anything about mandolins, right? The tone bars are kind of like the tone generation center of the instrument. It's like if you ripped off the bridge plate of a pre-war Martin guitar, that's kind of like the heart, the nerve center of the instrument that produces its tone. The tone bars are the same for the Loar. So the tone bars were intact, but shards of mandolin everywhere. They were commingled. They couldn't tell which splinters were from which mandolin. So what they do is they pack up both mandolins and take them to the new Nashville factory for Gibson Instruments. Gibson had just moved.
Can I get in for just one thing, which is that some of the pieces of the mandolins were so small that they were just slivers in the carpet. So they had to vacuum the carpet.
Oh my God.
And they took a vacuum bag back to the factory to try to put them back together.
That's insane. I didn't know that fact, but it makes sense, right? Like if you take a fire poker to spruce, which is a pretty like kind of soft wood, and it splinters off like that, man, you're gonna need to.
Yeah, imagine putting that stuff back together.
Yeah. So, anyways, they scoop up both mandolins and all their parts, and they take them to Charlie Darrington, the acoustic engineer and mandolin builder at the Gibson Nashville plant. He was a well-respected luthier at the time, but as a result of having worked on Monroe's mandolin, it kind of achieved legendary status. You know, most people who own a Darrington-era Gibson F5 mandolin do so with pride. Those are kind of regarded as some of the better mandolins that Gibson has produced in the modern era. So they get Monroe's mandolins, both of the Lors, to Charlie Darrington. And Darrington is actually very hopeful for the repair process on both of these mandolins because the assailant had missed the tone bars with the fire poker. The kind of tonal structure of the mandolin was still intact. But like you said, Marcel, the splinters were all commingled.
Oh.
They couldn't tell which splinters were from which mandolin.
Oh, man.
So Darrington,
I hate it.
I know. Darrington had to sit with a magnifying glass and examine each splinter for variations in the finish color to determine which mandolin the splinter came from first. Then, once the splinters were separated, he went into a process of identifying where the splinters actually came from on Monroe's main mandolin, the July 9, 23 Lore. So, like I said earlier...
Just give the man a raise.
Oh my God. He literally worked, they said in the Can't You Hear Me Callin' book, Richard Smith says that Darrington worked 40-hour weeks entirely devoting his time to the reconstruction of Bill Monroe's mandolin, which is insane. He did that for 3 months. It took him 3 months to get the mandolin back together. But fast forward a couple months, February of 1986, Darrington completes the mandolin, gets it back to Monroe, and Monroe is ecstatic. There's a famous picture of him like cradling the mandolin like it was his child, you know. Even though they said it required some playing back in, Monroe was very happy with the tone of it at that point in time, which is interesting, right? I think Monroe's an honest enough guy to where if it had sucked, he would have said something. We all know his fraught relationship with Gibson and the whole scraping of the logo out of the headstock and all that stuff from back in the day. So Monroe wouldn't have been.
This is when they actually replaced the Gibson name in the headstock, right? Because he gouged it out after he sent it in for like some work to be done, and he said, "Don't touch the finish," and they like lacquered over the whole thing or something.
And I think it was literally that, right? Somebody, you know, I will get angry emails for this if we are wrong, but I think it was lacquered over when those mandolins were originally varnished, you know, too. So it was like a huge F up on Gibson's part at that point in time. But Darrington, I think, redeemed them.
You're telling a beautiful story here, Hayes. I like what you're doing, but who smashed the mandolin, and like what are the cops doing? Like what are the theories, at least, you know? Like, do we know anything new?
That we still don't know, and that's actually where I was headed next. In the meantime, you know, there's a police investigation, speculations are made, and it's almost like a footnote in the Can't You Hear Me Calling book, which I thought was really interesting, that the Monroes, Bill, Delia, and James, said, oh, it could have been some disgruntled farmhand that we let go. That's probably what happened. And then, like, that's it. There's like a one-sentence mention of potentially who this was. Nobody's named. And the Monroes are like, that's it.
Interesting.
And to me, that's like suspicious as hell.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that it was an angry ex-lover.
Right. Like, I don't want to immediately jump to conclusions on that. But the police investigation does reveal, or at least they speculate, that if a man had been the assailant, he would have grabbed the mandolin by the neck and smashed it on a hard surface. I don't know like how they link that to male psychology or whatever, but this is what the police seem to think. A man would have grabbed the mandolin by the neck and smashed it. But the fact that a small instrument was taken to them and like, they were kind of like stabbed in that fashion. Some portraits of Bill Monroe over his fireplace were also stabbed with the fire poker.
Ooh.
So, you know what I mean? It's like,
but I mean,
they say that
no. The stabbing the paintings with the fire poker, I mean, that seems like a crime of like passion, right? If it was a dude, they would have just smashed the mandolin. But if it was like a lover, they would have destroyed the paintings, right? Why would a farmhand do that?
Nah. I would have been satisfied knowing that I destroyed Bill Monroe's most prized possession. I wouldn't have needed to scratch out his eyes. You know what I mean?
Seems like the boys might be wrapping this one up. You two mind breaking the fourth wall and telling the folks where they can find you online?
Yeah, no problem, JD. Well, I mean, first, I want to say thank you so much for listening to the first season of Podcast with Marcel. It's really been a pleasure to produce, and I love hearing from all you guys. You guys are obsessed with the lore and stuff. I mean, it's just been an absolute pleasure. So, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me at lessonswithmarcel.com. But thank you sincerely for watching. Hayes?
Yeah, my name is Hayes Griffin, folks. Thanks so much for listening to Season 1. This has been an absolute pleasure to work with Marcel. And like you said, the lore is coming. The LOAR is coming. You can.
I hate.
You guys.
I hate how good that is.
You guys can find me at hayesgriffin.club. That's my lesson website if you want to study some guitar with me, or I'm lurking in the depths of YouTube and Instagram, same as Marcel these days.
I guess we'll see you all in Season 2. Y'all come back now, you hear?
Peace out.